Hi, and welcome to tonight's live music tech webinar. Tonight, we're carrying on with our series on music tech basics. We're going to look at the stereo field, which is one of our 4 sonic qualities. This one's quite an important one. We're going to look a bit more in depth about automation and how to control it this week. It's going to be good, and I think most of the things that you would have thought about, being a music producer, you would have thought about, but actually it's not bad to kind of go over it and just have a little look at what we're dealing with here. So this is the content for tonight's show. We're once again, we're going to look at the different stages that we deal with the stereo field, starting with how to record it in, looking at the mixing process, and then looking at the mastering process. We're then going to look at the speaker range and some configurations. We're also going to take a look at how the instruments and voices are generally set up, depending on the genre. And then we're going to look at some basic mixing settings and some positioning. And then finally, I've got a couple of questions on the Q&A that we're going to discuss, and kind of, if you guys have any other further questions that you would like to chip in, please feel free to do so. So recording, mixing, mastering. Once again, these are definitely 3 different areas, and in a professional recording environment, there will generally be 3 different people doing these areas, okay? Being at our level, you're pretty much going to do them all at the best of your possible abilities. So let's start by looking at the input signal. Now, if you're recording a microphone, it comes in as a mono channel, okay? And in the recording process, you generally, pretty much 100%, will not touch the panning. You'll let it come in natural, straight down the center, unless you're doing a live mix. That might be slightly different, but for a production process, is coming straight in down the center, and we'll do all our tweaking during the mixing stage. There will be times and opportunities to record stereo. Now, stereo generally is used for synthesizers, keyboards, electric keyboards. One of the examples I'm thinking of right now is kind of the Wurlitzer. Now, the Wurlitzer is an electric keyboard that has this built-in speaker that rotates. Now, this is perfect for recording in stereo because you can record in the stereo field as the speaker rotates. You get that kind of whooshing around both speakers. This one opportunity, but also if you've got these really high-end keyboard modules, you also got different things happening on both speakers, and some of the patches or the presets that are built into these units need to be stereo placed, okay? That's not to say that you can't further position them once you get into the mixing process, because you can, but you certainly don't want to destroy that stereo enhancements that's already happened before that. So that's the general recording process. Very simple. Once again, we're just controlling the levels in. We don't really need to touch the actual panning. But when you get to the mixing, each channel needs to have its own position within the stereo field. I tend to take a very conservative route with this initially, okay, where everything's just panned ever so slightly. And as my mix progresses, as I get 36 channels plus, I will gradually make them slightly wider, giving everything their own space. If you've got a relatively small mix, you can be a bit more liberal with this, and you can push it out a bit more. My rule of thumb is that you're thinking about it from an audience perspective. Unless you're doing something that's psychedelic and something that's slightly out there, generally the spacing and the placement needs to be quite real. If you start placing things hard left and hard right, and then panning them hard left and hard right, you're going to get these really weird contrasts that sometimes are good. So weird isn't necessarily a bad thing, but they are sometimes good, they're sometimes bad. But if you are going to go for these wide spectrums, you definitely need to think about what you're doing and how you want that to be interpreted. Then you get to the mastering stage. Now, the general rule of thumb for me, not really being a mastering engineer, is to push and enhance the stereo range. And I'll generally do this with some kind of stereo spreader. Okay, so the stereo spreader kind of takes what you've done and just pushes all the frequencies and all the instruments and makes them slightly wider. And in total, it gives you a broader range, and it makes your mix work better across a wider range of speakers. Whereas if you didn't have the spreader, you might find that actually you're not getting the consistency on all different ranges of speakers, from small speakers to large speakers to headphones to card speakers and all the rest of it. So those are my kind of rules of thumb, and that's kind of how I deal with these processes. Okay, next we're going to look at the speaker range. Now this is generally done in music terms using stereo speakers, left and right speakers, and we always place ourselves or the audience dead in the center, and we look at this kind of spectrum about what surrounds them. So here's a general rule. This is kind of your basic rock setup, okay? So you've got your snare, your tom toot, and your vocals pretty much always dead center, okay? And I tend to back that up with the bass guitar as well, and the bass the bass drum as well. Sorry, I'm losing my words. And then if you look evenly, you've got the tom. So you've got tom 1 going to tom 3. Now this is quite nice because you think about it. If your fills go tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, you're going to get this nice fill that the actual fill is being automated across the speakers, even though it's not. And you get this kind of whoosh across the speakers, which gives it a lively bounce, which is nice. The backing vocals tend to be spread just a little bit wider. Now, what I tend to do with mine is I definitely group my backing vocals. What you're seeing here is 2 sets of backing vocals widely spread, and that's really to add balance to the mix. So that's something you're going to need to trial and error to a certain degree, but that's the general rule of thumb. And you can see hi-hat is slotted right in the middle there on the right hand side. Now on the far area, you've got this overhead right and overhead left. Now these are what I call the ambient mics. I'll use quite a complex ambient setup, and these will capture the cymbals, or these will capture the ambient sound depending on what you're recording and how you're recording. If you're recording a live mix, you're definitely going to want these ambient sounds. Setting up 2 stereo microphones or a coincident pair or whatever, and just making sure that they spread wide across the mix, giving you that live feel. And sometimes that can cancel out needing to put lots of reverb on, or different reverb, depending on the mix that you're going for. And once again, the guitars are a funny thing because you're going to have this wide spread of guitars, but depending on a rock track, you're probably going to have a few more guitars in there placed around the stereo field as well. So there's your general kind of rule of thumb of how to position things, and that is really just a starting point. You will need to tweak this. You will need to look at automation as your arrangement develops. You will need to kind of experiment with different configurations to kind of make this lively feel, to make the contrast happen. Okay, so speaker configurations. When we're talking about music, the dominant source of music is still stereo, and it has been since probably the 1940s, 1950s. Before that, it was mono. During the 1970s, 1980s, there was some work done on quadraphonic, which is quite interesting, where you've got 2 sets of stereo speakers placed in far corners of the rooms. And basically it gave this surround feel, and it was used quite a bit. I remember my parents, they had the quadraphonic system, and it was really nice to listen to. Then you went into the sort of 1990s, you started looking at your surround sound systems, and in terms of surround sound, the still dominant speaker configuration in cinemas and homes is 5.1. Cinemas goes slightly further than that, but the configuration is almost identical, even though they do have more speakers. And you can get sort of 7.2s, 2.1s, and so on. What the 0.2 and the 0.1 means is basically the subwoofer. So you've got this array of speakers, and then you've got one speaker handling the lower frequencies. I bought an album recently, the Pet Shop. No, sorry, not Pet Shop Boys. What am I saying? The Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, and that's just been remastered in 5.1. And if you get a chance, that's really worth the listen. Actually, it's fantastic in 5.1. So there you go. There's some speaker configurations there. Now, instruments, as we talked earlier, you have these starting points, and you can see I configured these starting points across my stereo field, and in many respects I've also looked at the volumes of each of these as well and where they sit. But this is very much my starting point. Now, movement is a spice of life. And when you're thinking about arrangements and when you're thinking about adding a little bit of depth to your mix, or when you're analyzing how other people record their mix, what you're going to find is that from time to time, things move in and drop out. In this scenario here, the lead vocal's gone from the center and he's dropped out to make way for our solo guitar. Now, it'd sound pretty weird if we left our solo guitar over on the left-hand side while he's doing his lovely solo. So it is commonplace to add your solo guitar in the middle. Okay, and once he's done, you're going to move him out of the way. And here we go. We have a keyboard solo. So we've moved him in. Okay. And then once again, we're back to the main vocals. And this is really important to get this idea that things don't have to stay where you place them initially, okay? They do have to move, they do have to evolve, okay? And arrangement is key. One thing you're going to find with arrangement is things drop out, and that's okay. And as things drop out, you need to reposition other instruments to make the mix sound less one-sided. Because you imagine if, let's go back to that slide there, you imagine my two guitars have dropped out, and my keyboard is still far over to the right. How do you think that's going to feel in your right and left ear? It's going to feel like your head is weighted to the right side because you haven't got the weight right, okay? Because you've dropped everything out and there's no balance there. So it's really important. Sorry, and I'll go this way again. It's really important to make sure you balance your mixing. Make sure you kind of think about these all times. If things drop out, you are going to need to compensate that with something else. So some good resources. One of my favorite books for dealing with panning is The Art of Mixing by David Gibson. And what he talks about in his book is lots and lots of different configurations for how to deal with mixing. This one here is his spectral diagram of how a rock mix would sound in your room. And you can see that you've got spreads on the piano that spread across the whole thing. So you've got that left-right stereo field being taken up by that piano completely. You've got quite a loud guitar over to the left side. You've got that lead guitar slightly pushed to the right. You've got the bass and the kick. Although they're low in frequency, the bubble is showing that they're actually quite loud. And then you've got the cymbals sitting on top of everything and these nice small shapes. If you can get a hold of this, it's well worth the probably 10, 12 quid that you can get it from Amazon. There's also a DVD as well. So if you don't really get into reading books, there's also a DVD. And he talks about different starting points and different configurations for different genres. So if you're looking at an R&B track, how you might start mixing that one. If you're looking at a soul track, how you might start mixing that one. And it's really interesting. And I don't think you can underestimate how much reading a book about these things really helps. And these guys have done this work before, okay? So it's really important to kind of get yourself sussed up and do a bit of reading or watch the videos that are out there from it. And this one in particular is one of my favorites because it is so visual. Okay, nice whirlwind tour. Not a massively long one tonight, but we do have a couple of questions, and hopefully I've covered one of those, which is the first one. Parts of my mix feel one-sided. How can I solve this? And that really comes down to this automation process, I guess, is if you set up your mix right in the first place, you're going to be fine. But the minute that the arrangement starts changing and you think, okay, I need to drop that one down in the mix, or I need to drop that instrument down in the mix, or I need to bring that one up in the mix, or whatever, you will find that the weight between speakers does change. And that's where the rebalancing comes in. So you need to be very vigilant about that. And the ears are a great source of just kind of working that out. And I'll always kind of emphasize this when I'm talking to my own students about just bobbing my head down to one side and oh yeah, can you hear that? Can you feel the weight that is lifting my head to one side? It's a bit of an over exaggeration, but it emphasizes actually you can feel the weight if it's not mixed properly. So you've got to think about your automation. You've got to think about rebalancing all the time and how the mix evolves. Now, the next one, how do I set up a 5-point mix? I have, and just bear with me for this one because I'm going to change over screens. It might just take me a couple of seconds, but I have Logic open up on another screen. And it's fairly simple. You do need, let's get that up. There we go. Hopefully that's working. Let me just make sure that's up. Yeah. So you do need some specialist hardware to bring some of this stuff in and hardware to kind of listen to it. So you obviously need a 5.1 system to be able to listen to this back. Now, what you've got in Logic, I always remember, because I'm a Cubase user and I have been for years and years, but in Logic, it seems a lot simpler to set up a 5.1 mix than Cubase. In Cubase, you had this master out channel, and there was always this kind of button here that you had to change it over to in order to send it to your speakers. And then they always used to charge you for the Dolby plugin that came with it. I'm not sure that that's still the case, but certainly it looks like Logic can deal with that in one easy move. So I've set up some basic sounds here. And my first one here is just a stereo. And you'll see that that's saying, okay, I'm going to the outputs. Now that will push that to this output channel, okay? However, if I change this to go back to outputs and then go surround sound, you'll see the panning positions change, but it also changes to this master. So it sends it straight out to a 5.1 mix. And then you'll notice that there's this nice little bounce button here. And if you click the bounce button, it will give you the options. And let's just check that for now. But it should give you the options to bounce it down to a surround bounce, which it does. In one easy move, I can bounce it down to an uncompressed surround mix. Nice and easy. Now, this is quite interesting. You can see that there are points in the mix here. It won't deal with the sub. What you've got to remember about the sub is anything below a certain frequency instantly goes to the sub. So when you're mixing, that's not something you overly have to worry about until the final kind of processing. So the actual sub mix is that gets taken from your mix anyway, and it will go straight to the sub. But what you've got here is your 5.1. So you've got this center speaker, and I can push it dead center there. And this bobble now is telling me that this track, instrument 1, is going to play almost at the center because I can't get it right. And if I want to go to the left speaker, like in my stereo field, I can then push it to the left. If I want to go to right. But if I only want it to come to the back speakers, which is my right back and my left back, then I can. If I want to place it between the two back speakers, now this is interesting because the spectrum here says, okay, if I place it in the middle, it's going to play evenly across. It's going to play evenly across all speakers, and that's where the weight comes in. So if I want a little bit of it to be coming out the front, then I don't push it hard. You know, much like my hard left and right, I have to balance that. And this little dial can be automated as well by turning this on. Right information. Oh, it's not going to let me do it. Yes, it did. I can automate that. So as I'm playing through the track, I can just automate this. So if you've got some kind of fire effect that you want to come more prominent, which is called a Doppler effect, you can do that, which is absolutely fantastic. So in one easy move, that's how you set up to do a 5.1 mix, as easy as that. In Cubase, it's slightly difficult, slightly more difficult, but not massively challenging. And I think in Pro Tools, it's just a cinch as well. So there's that. Let's go back to the main screen and let's see if we have any Q&A as well. So where are we? Sorry, it might take me a couple of seconds. Always takes me a little bit of time to move backwards and forwards. So those are my 2 questions that I've got asked this week via email. And if you have any questions that you want asked in the show, please feel free to do that. And I will try and get as many out there as possible. Now, questions from the Q&A. Currently, there's none there. Okay, so let's go to the discussion. No, none there. And let's finally just check the page. And we're good to go. So no questions tonight. Once again, if you want to ask your questions during the week, please feel free to. It's always good to hear from you guys. And before we go, a bit of promotion from me. If you go to the musictechstudent.co.uk page now, we have our newsletter up and running, which you can sign up to, which is fantastic. It's taken a little bit of time to do. It's been a long time in the coming, but hopefully in the next few weeks, you're going to start receiving regular emails based on things that we've been up to, new resources, revision techniques, lots and lots of really good stuff for you guys to plow into. Now, next week, we're looking at depth of field, so our final sonic quality. So please feel free to join us, and I look forward to seeing you guys there.